So speaking of reform, before we started the recording, you told me about your 9 theses of reform. First of all, how did you come up with the idea, and what are the 9 theses?
99 names. Within the Islamic tradition, we say that Allah has 99 attributes or adjectives. And so I think that there's something magical about the 9. You could also maybe think about Martin Luther's 9 theses, but Martin Luther is actually not a role model to me, because one of his last books before he died was a very anti-Semitic book about it was called About the Jews and Their Lies, and he also wrote a book against the Turks, which was a metaphor for the Muslims.
Right.
So Martin Luther, who is the great icon of Reformation in the West, just before he died, he actually laid the ideological fundament for anti-Semitism. So he's not a role model to me. So, but the 9 theses of reform are based on the activism that we do right now in the Maria Mosque, and the activism that we would like to do in the future. So it's actually not it's something which is very concrete. And the first thesis is women's right to act as female imams. And we already implemented that in Denmark. We started a mosque, and we have female imams who lead the prayer for women, and they give the khutbah. The second thesis is the right for Muslim women to have Islamic divorce. And actually today in Denmark, Sweden, and in the rest of the world, women do not even have the basic right of Islamic divorce in many places, because Muslim communities have not made the fusion yet between the existing European law and Islamic guidance. So we believe that you should make that fusion. So when you are divorced according to Danish law or Swedish law, you should automatically be divorced according to Islamic guidance. But unfortunately, this is not existing right now, only in a very few mosque communities. So we have constructed a new Islamic marriage contract in the Maria Mosque where women have the right to divorce. So it's implemented. She has the right. And unfortunately, we have a lot of cases with women, and it's increasing, who are subjected to mental violence, physical violence, and they are trapped in a religious marriage. They are divorced according to Danish law, but they are trapped psychologically, religiously in an Islamic marriage because the husband refuses to divorce her. And to me, that's really absurd that we still today in 2018 do not have the basic right for Islamic divorce. So as a Muslim leader, as a spiritual leader, as an imam, you have the right. I mean, you are obligated to give women and men the same rights. And you should either make the fusion between Danish law or an Islamic guidance, or you should give women the right to divorce in the marriage contract, so there won't be any mistakes.
But isn't this also a case and a responsibility for the Danish government to act upon?
I think it would be very easy for them, because right now we are applying to become a new Islamic faith community in Denmark. And we have to live up to certain conditions. And they could easily say that in order for you to be a new Islamic faith community, you should give women equal rights to men.
Of course.
But they don't. So this is also something that we work for. And in the Maria Mosque, we give Muslim women divorce, and we are proud to do it. And we want to standardize our practice, and we want to encourage all Muslim leaders, not only in Denmark, but in the world, to change the marriage contract and give women their basic right of divorce, which is an Islamic principle that they took out of the contract. So we have so many practices that we have normalized that are patriarchal, that are not rooted in Islam. The third thesis is a little bit controversial, but it's Muslim women's right to marry whoever they want to marry. And that should also be a basic human right. unfortunately today we have a situation where Muslim men can marry non-Muslims, but Muslim women cannot are not able to marry non-Muslims. So if you fall in love with, as a Muslim woman, if you fall in love with a non-Muslim, he has to convert if you are going to get the Islamic marriage contract or go through with it. So in the Mariam Mosque, we do interfaith marriages, and because it's very rare still and people do not know about it, or that there are different imams, different places in the world who does it, but it's not very, it hasn't been normalized yet.
Is that only radical in the Muslim community, or also in the Christian community?
I think that it happens within also other religions, not only within Islam.
I mean, do you get a lot of protests from the Christian community for this as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, we don't.
Okay.
Yes. What do you mean? I didn't understand
No,
the question.
sorry. No, I'm because the interfaith marriage principle affects both the Muslim and the Christian community.
Yes.
And you say this is kind of controversial or very controversial?
It's controversial among Muslims.
Yeah.
Because today the practice is that you need to convert as a Christian man in order to marry a Muslim woman. So, and Tunisia is the only Islamic country who in 2017 November, they changed the law. So they allowed Muslim women to marry non-Muslims.
Right.
And it's backed up by a group of ulama, Islamic scholars, but it's the only Muslim country still. So still it's very new to many Muslims that this is a possibility. And in the Mariam Mosque, we believe that it's a basic Islamic right to choose your partner. We believe that there is an essence of gender equality in the Quran that we need to act upon. And we also believe that if the man is allowed to marry a Jew or a Christian, the woman is allowed to marry a Jew or a Christian, that the language in the Quran is universal.
How about atheists?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had an opportunity. I haven't had a couple who came where the man was an atheist yet. It was Christians who really couldn't convert because they were Christians. But
if you did?
If a couple comes to me and there are two Muslims, I do not ask the Muslim man, how practicing are you as a Muslim? Do you pray 5 times a day? Are you Muslim at all or only by name? Are you a cultural Muslim or a practicing Muslim? So to me, what is important when I have a pre-conversation with a couple is that I look upon things as, do they respect each other? Are they sincere? How long have they known each other? I prefer to marry a couple who known each other for a while instead of someone who just met each other. So I look at the mutual communication. So I do not judge and I do not... So to me, what is important is that they trust each other and they respect each other and they love each other.
Sounds good. Sounds very... It's hard not to agree with, I think.
So... and then, I mean, there are 9 theses. I don't know if you want me to go through them.
Please continue, yeah.
Okay, the 4th thesis is a rereading of the Quran with a focus on gender equality. So we try to reread the Quran and we try to do it with a focus on gender equality, which means that there are some verses in the Quran which are being read discriminatory against women. So we try to reread these verses, and this is actually a long tradition. I mean, many scholars and tried to do this for many years. So it's not something new that we do. It's just we just proceeding a practice that has been going on for many, many years. And let me give you an example. There is a specific verse in the Quran. There are actually 6 verses in the Quran that could be interpreted as implementing a hierarchy between men and women or as discriminating women. One of them is a surah. It's a chapter about the women, where it says that al-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa. It means that the men are above the woman. It's being translated with men are above women. And this is the Danish translation. by a scholar, a Danish scholar. And I think that if you look in some of the Quran translations, you will find this translation, unfortunately. And of course, if you read a verse saying that men are above the woman, it's extremely problematic, because what does it mean? And the word qawamuna in Arabic, it has many different meanings. It could be also translated that the man should take care of the woman or encourage the woman. And this is actually the translations that we put forward in the Maria Mosque, saying that what do you do as a man? You stand behind your woman, you encourage your woman in what she wants and in her work, in her ambitions, in her way of thinking.
So it doesn't need to mean above, it could mean like behind and support.
Support, like a pillar. You support your woman, you encourage her, you take care of her. And if you give it that translation, it will have a totally different meaning. So that's one example. There's another verse in the Quran which is about inheritance. It says that men inherit more than women. And it could also be translated or interpreted as discriminatory against women, of course. But this verse is a specific verse. It's not a universal verse, and it was revealed at a time where men had the economical responsibility for women.
Right.
But today it's very different.
So it's problematic, any text that is that old to interpret that literally, because society has changed.
Yeah,
right?
you have to look at it with new eyes. You have to look at it according to our times and our societies. And this is why Muslim scholars distinguish between verses that are universal and verses that are not universal, which you have to interpret.
Which are time specific.
Yes. So you have to, today women are economically independent. So the verse is not relevant in the same sense anymore. So these are some examples of how you can reread the Quran with a focus on gender equality. And it is very needed to do that, because the Quran is being used as a legitimacy for different actions and practices in the families and in our societies and in communities. Then we have a thesis about the fight against female genital mutilation. It's a new area to us, so it's I don't have much information about it, like statistically, but I know that it's going on in different countries. In Egypt and in African countries, it's taking place. And it's actually a quite huge number of girls who are being subjected to female genital mutilation. And we would like to fight against that in the future.
But is that really a religious phenomena or cultural?
No, it's cultural.
Yeah.
And it happens within Christian cultures. I've met Danish girls who has, they have a Christian religious background, but they're also subjected to female genital mutilation. It's not a religious thing, it's a cultural thing. And it happens in different cultures and within different religions. And it has absolutely nothing to do with Islam.
So there's nothing in the scriptures, nothing in the Quran about that?
No, not at all. It's a barbaric tradition, unfortunately. Then we have the fight against Islamophobia, anti-Islamic rhetoric and propaganda. That's one of the theses. Also the fight against anti-Semitism. And Denmark has a growing anti-Islamic rhetoric and propaganda, and the same thing is happening in Sweden. So we are actually facing a challenge when it comes to how to combat the growing anti-Islamic rhetoric. And this is something that it's one of our pillars in the Maria Mosque. And the fact that we went worldwide gives us a great opportunity to fight the growing anti-Islamic rhetoric and propaganda, because we try to write new narratives and we try to change these existing narratives about what Islam is.
Sometimes I sense that there are, it's hard to know when the critique against Islam is needed to create reform, and when it's Islamophobic. Can you recognize that notion? So sometimes it's critique that it's motivated and necessary for Islam to reform, and sometimes it's just lack of knowledge or prejudice?
I don't think it's difficult to distinguish between criticism and between propaganda.
All right.
There's a huge distinction between criticism and propaganda, because criticism is important, and criticism is a part of our Islamic tradition and theology and history. Muslim scholars have always within the history debated whether God existed, whether Maryam was a prophet or not a prophet. I mean, so we have discussed and debate almost any theme within the religious tradition. It's not something new, and it's not something which is condemned. Many years ago, they discussed whether a woman could be a female imam, so it's not a new discussion. It has been under discussion. 3 out of 4 law schools allows female imams who lead the prayers for the women. So all these discussions about Islamic feminism, about the existence of God, about many things, these are not new discussions, and criticism is really an Islamic principle. But there's a huge difference between criticizing something or having a more critical approach to the interpretation, understanding of the Quran, and then propaganda. Anti-Islamic rhetoric and propaganda are characterized by the fact that you generalize. So when you generalize a group of people or give them very distinctive negative characteristics, this has nothing to do with criticism. This is propaganda.
Right.
So we need to make that distinction.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And then one of the last theses is promoting Sufism. And Sufism is the spiritual path within Islam. Sufism is not a new phenomenon. I believe that the Prophet Muhammad was a Sufi. And after the death of the Prophet, Sufism blossomed around in the 11th century. We had all these new Sufi orders who spread to the rest of the world, or to all of the world. We had the first Sufi community in England in the 17th century, and it spread also to Europe and to Denmark and Sweden through literature,
poetry,
yeah. People who converted,
and it's a more mystical dimension, right? Also, it helps the metaphorical reading of the Quran.
It does. It is a more mystical, spiritual interpretation of Islam, where you're very focused on the higher spiritual meanings behind the rituals, behind your actions. And one of my role models, Rabia al-Adawiya, she was a Sufi saint. She died in 801. She was one of the women who laid the fundament for Sufism, that kind of Sufism that later on became more institutionalized.
So how are these 9 theses perceived? Because I reckon that you are talking about them and spreading them.
We are already practicing many of the theses.
Yeah.
And I do believe in that we have to put our words into actions, because we can have a lot of conferences and talk a lot about reform, but things will stay the same until we act upon them. So, and I do believe it is possible, and I can see that it's possible to change the narrative. Even now, the general Danish community, they know that female imams is a possibility. So it's hard to hold on to the narrative that Islam is a barbaric, female suppressive religion, when they can see women taking the lead and creating a mosque and disseminating more spiritual readings of the Quran with a focus on gender equality. You cannot hold on to the narrative that it's a suppressive religion when you can see women liberating themselves through the religion, with religion as the tool.